Welcome back, everybody, to the newest episode of the penpodcast.com. I would say I'm your host, Matthew Harms, but today we have a special treat that I think has only been done once or twice before on this show. Have a past guest who has become a good friend who would like to interview me. So if everyone could be so kind as to welcome back the amazing Julienne Ryan, we would greatly appreciate it. How are you today, Julienne?
I am well. I'm always enthusiastic, excited when I get to revisit with a friend and then also collect stories. And I am addicted to backstories. I'm just coming, be truthful. I love it. I love to learn about it because I have a expression I've used for a couple of years now that I practice story tourism with my clients and my podcast guests, because like when we're traveling and we visit a new environment, we see the land and the buildings a new way, and sometimes even each other. So I like to dig in, and it's also applied nosiness. I get to ask a lot of questions. So with that preamble, the spotlight's going to be on you today in a new way. And I think your listeners are going to be excited to learn new facts about you and how you got here, as we say in Queens. So tell me, you have a very rich and varied career that people can read your bio, read your websites, but let's talk a little bit about what's got you to this point in time and some of the rather interesting pivots you've done about your career and the whys.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to sum that up, because that is a winding road, we'll just call it dumb luck, perseverance,
Okay.
refusing to quit, rolling with the punches.
But you're being very modest. And I'm laughing as I'm saying this, that layered question, because I have an expression. It's like Queen's philosophy. Nothing is linear. Everything is connected. So, but you had some moments along the way. Is there anything that you had that stand out in your way that it took you where you were alert and listening and you welcomed up opportunity versus saying, I'm not going to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I would say to that is you got to get out of your comfort zone. And it can be very easy, no matter how varied your career is, if it's all in a corporate setting or in a specific type of industry. You've done things a certain way. There's no need. Like I was in a retail banking and finance industry.
Right.
I didn't need to get out and meet new people. I didn't need to work my sphere of influence, or like none of that mattered. It was make the most of the people who walk through the door every day, report your numbers and go home and hopefully, not lose any money for the bank physically or theoretically. But when I made the decision that I just didn't want to do that anymore, it took a lot of changing behaviors and showing up to things that I normally wouldn't do. And this was maybe fortunately, right when the pandemic happened. So everyone else was having to do the same thing. So these online networking groups and masterminds were all popping up left and right so people could have that connection. And I just took advantage of it. And I plugged into as many of them as I could because, I was home anyway with nothing to do. So I was like, I might as well give it a shot. And then, some turned out to be better than others. You stick with some for longer than others. And through one of those networking groups, I met a gentleman who kind of sparked the pen for hire trajectory.
Okay. And people know it, they see the name, but in the beginning, what was he sharing with you? What did he would like you to do? Something in you got him to think and reach out to you. So banking to ghostwriting and helping someone to get their book out. Not always the most linear pivot, but tell us more.
Yeah, not at all. I had been writing since I was a kid. Prior to quitting my corporate job, I had written 2 of my own books, just getting kind of back into it, which is when I realized I could not stay there. Like it was just stifling my creativity. And so when I joined this mastermind group, everyone else was already a business owner. They already kind of had some type of product, some offering, some model. And I was that guy who's just like, I'm just trying to figure it out. And, so through questioning, like you're asking me now, is like, what do you like to do? What have you done? And I happened to bring up that I wrote those 2 books. And the gentleman was like, wait, you can write books? I was like,
Okay.
yeah. He's like, why didn't you say that sooner? I was like, well, I didn't think it was that special because yeah, I wrote them. Like, he was like, no, seriously, like that's what you could do. And I was like, but I already wrote 2. They're not making me any money. And he was like, well, that's not what I'm talking about. That's a whole other conversation. We can talk about marketing and book selling. He's like, but why don't you write books for other people?
Mm.
And I was like, wait, that's a thing? He was like, you've never heard of ghostwriting? And I was like, no, not really. He was like, well, all right, I'm your first client. He's like, I've already written a book. It's an Amazon bestseller. I started my second. My business is doing too well. I'm too busy. You can write books. I need a book. You're writing my book. And I was like, no. And he was like, yes. And I think I fought him like for 2 or 3 back and forths. And then finally he's like, look, stop overthinking it. You need money. I need a book. I was like, okay, let's do it.
Isn't that amazing? Sometimes the craziest things have flow, that they're unexpected. They're completely opposite of we say we want to go here, but something or someone is taking us in a different direction. Just even the act of podcasting. I mean, years ago, go back to like 2012, hitting the Zoom button to record for a meeting was a major, big emotional step. It was way too much waiting. But years later, starting a podcast with a colleague and showing up on others, we never know what's going to take us forward. I think my expression, I have lots of expressions, from having talked to me and make me for lunch. The best stories are always hiding in plain sight. And I don't mean the stories we tell, but it's the stories we also tell ourselves. And that moment in the mastermind is a great lesson for everybody, that it takes a conversation where somebody's going to notice something in you that you're taking for granted, and it's hiding in plain sight. And that's where your secret sauce is, or the thing that lights you up and gives you energy and informs your experience and takes you into a whole different world. And then tell us more. You did ghostwriting and then you did other stuff. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So again, a lot of it was just a product of being in that position where I had quit my corporate job. There was no paycheck coming in, and
I guess.
started assessing like what would I have done if I can go back 20 years ago, right? Like, what are my passions beyond just writing? And I was like, well, I always liked real estate. So next thing you know, my brother and I, with another partner, started an Airbnb rental business in the Poconos, out in northeastern Pennsylvania. And because of COVID, it did well for a little while. And then we just realized that wasn't something we enjoyed doing. We pivoted that into long-term rentals, which we're still doing to this day. We now manage about 65 rental units that we own. We spun that into property management when other people started asking us, like, who does your management on your buildings? And we're like, we do. And they started hiring us. So now we manage close to 130 units in total.
Wow.
Through doing all of that in the one general area, which it's kind of funny because as wide and net and varied as my businesses are, like there is a lot of common threads. So all of those properties are held within a 20-mile radius of each other. And we identified the lack of transportation options in the area. So we partnered with the local county government. And now we have 2 vans on the road. We do non-emergency medical transportation. We do shuttle bus service, party bus service, airport transfers, you name it. If people need to get from point A to point B, we're doing it.
And I think that when you told me that, and that is amazing, because that's the power of listening. You're part of the community. So you were a trusted entity, a known name. And then you saw something that was hiding in plain sight that people might have been doing informally, and you showed up. Listen, I've grown up in Queens, in the Bronx, where nobody wants to take you anywhere sometimes. And it was before there was Uber in New York, trust me, guys, there was Gypsy Cab, but it was always a bit of an adventure. So the fact that you saw this opportunity and said, okay, this is a bit of a pivot. It's a +1 on the product side, but it still works. And I applaud you. I think that's such a great lesson for all of us. It doesn't mean we have to be entrepreneurs, but just seeing things in a fresh way and showing up and saying, let me try it. And I think that's what I admire about you. You give it a go and you kind of engineer and figure out, how's this going to work?
And that's exactly it. Is every idea going to work? No, the Airbnb one did not work, but we figured that out quick enough to pivot before it became a detriment. And now it's become one of our most successful businesses. The transportation company, there were one or two people doing it kind of as a one-off service, advertise like, I'll run your errands, and they're just advertising on Facebook, and it's them personally in their 20-year-old car. Whereas we sat down, saw the need, partnered with the county to gather data through surveys and all these other
Mm,
means to say, hey, is there really the need we think there is? And then once we decided we were going to give it a go, we went in 120%. I mean, we bought a brand new minivan, a brand new 14-seater shuttle, and fully committed to, no, this is going to work. We're not just going to put
mhm.
an old Subaru on the road and see if it's successful. No, we're going to set ourselves up from the beginning to be successful.
There's so many things built into that. First, when you said sometimes the people we're in competition with become our collaborators and our thing, not to put you on the spot on this case, but there's a colleague that I've reached out to that had a similar thought process, and we end up collaborating on our podcast and doing work together. So instead of saying, all this is mine, I'm unique, I thought, well, maybe I could get out of my own way and be much more visible and much more, have much more fun in the process. The other thing I liked about the van example is that you visualized something happening and gave it a premiere experience before you even hit the road. And look at, I think it sends a great message to somebody. Think about all the people. I had elder care things I had to handle. The experience when someone shows up to you with a smile and things are clean and it's organized. I used to have to take my parents around and get all these crazy services in New York. And it humanizes the experience and says, okay, for a few minutes, I'm driving in style and somebody's going to take me where I need to go. So I think that is something that you should mention to when you're advertising, that is a way it can be such a comfort. So I applaud you for thinking that way.
Well, I appreciate that. And honestly, if it wasn't for the trials and tribulations with Pen for Hire and trying to grow that and franchise that, I wouldn't have known the first thing about a company handbook, an employee,
Oh,
manual.
yes.
So one of the first things we did before anyone went on the road is branded polo shirts, just like you said, very clean.
Mm,
All of our vans are lettered the exact same with the company logo and the phone number. The drivers are expected to get out at every fare and open the door for the passenger.
good. Wonderful. And having had cars in my earlier day, my husband, we were broke. We had all these used cars and things that were breaking down the road. There's something like a confidence of the car is going to take you where you want to go and start. So, that whole reliability. So pivot was one of my favorite words. And a lot of the stories, interviews, when I'm doing workshops with clients to get them to share stories and connect and teamwork, or interviews like this, pivot is always so exciting. And if I'm thinking of, I'm going to get you on the spot a little bit and ask you when you've had to pivot in the moment and change the conversation. So I'm going to buy you some time and give you an example, because this is actually how I've worked in my sessions, in interviews and ever. I would give my own example and lay it out there. So years ago, I was starting to do podcasts as a guest, and I was very excited. And there's one man who's very established. He does a lot with men who are retiring and next stage. And I showed up as the other on his podcast, and things were going really well. We were chit-chatting, it was relaxed. And then suddenly in the middle of it, he goes, "Be funny now." Well, man, in that moment, it's amazing how fast your brain can work, because I was panicking, saying this could be the end of me. I'm supposed to be funny. And then the inner Queens girl stepped up and said, I have spent my entire marriage trying to get a word in edgewise, because I'm married to an Irishman who never met a sentence he could make longer. But in that moment, I remember thinking, you need to be ready with a story or with that just in case moment. So that's what that 20-second freaking scary moment, live, of course, it's never on the recorded one. It's on live ones that these happen. So spill your guts. Tell me what happened.
Best example, or at least the one that's going to come to mind right now, is the one that I'm probably the most thankful for. Is, don't quote me on exactly when this was. It was somewhere at the beginning of Pen for Hire, before all the other
Mm,
businesses were taking off, and there was just not enough money coming in. And someone that very good friend of mine, actually, is my son, both my son's godfather. I've known him forever. Worked in the same industry that I did. And he was like, look, I switched companies. This new company is looking to hire managers. My boss is your old boss from this company. Like, it's a perfect situation. Why don't you just come and interview? I was like,
okay.
no, I don't really want to. I was like, I said, I've always said before, like, I'd kill myself before I got back into banking. Like, I would go lay down in traffic. And he was like,
Yeah.
you told me last night that you were close to laying down in traffic. I was like, I guess I did, didn't I? So I figured, you know what, let me go. You know, even if I take the job for 6 months, get my insurance back, get squirrel away a little savings, can't be the worst thing in the world. Showed up for the interview, broke the suit back out, sitting there in the row of applicants with resume in hand. And this guy's just like going back and forth. I'm like trying to say, like, it's almost like I'm not there. And this is someone I worked for, I don't know, almost 2 years.
Mm.
And in that moment, I looked around and I said, what the fuck am I doing here?
Oh, okay.
Like, just seeing that, there was just something in his mannerisms, the treatment. And I was like, if this is happening now before I even have the job, this is going to be exactly what I go right back to. And I
Yes.
walked out.
Yes. And I have an expression, I have a lot of expressions, again, I say, but when I was recruiting and doing professional development, which I still work on that aspect, people, I use that analogy in a different way. If that is the first date and that's how you're experiencing each other, what's the marriage going to be like? And a lot of times we talk ourselves out of things that we know are not, we talk ourselves into things, I should say, that we know we shouldn't be doing, or we need to push through a little harder to get to the thing we know we're supposed to be doing and maybe a little scared of, or we need to just put some more elbow and back into it. So that is a great analogy, saying that that took some risk. And
In 30
then
days,
what happened after that?
in 30 days, I landed 3 of my biggest clients at Pen for Hire, and no longer needed that job.
Fantastic. Fantastic. But there's messages there too about a backup plan, being open to something, not giving up. And then again, that focus, this is what I want now. And I need to figure out how to get there. So what is your go-to phrase? Do you have like a song or a phrase in your head that goes through when you're going through some of these moments that you need to pay attention to?
Oh my goodness. I honestly, I probably have multiple that I can't even think of at the moment, but since music and laughing at myself is a common theme, as I was telling you before we got on today, that if it wasn't you, I probably would have canceled this.
Oh, I know.
So today, the song of the day for today would be Chumbawamba's I Get Knocked Down.
Okay. Yes. I mean, and I love that whole theme song. I always have somehow ask one more question, which has come to be amazing in conversations because it always reveals something new or something unexpected in the room or within an individual. Like last week I was in Ireland and we were in a coffee shop and I just happened to ask the guy a couple of questions. And I was in a town in the middle of nowhere that I had never been to. And we found that we had somebody in common. So you never know. So ask one more question is a way to discover things worth discovering.
On the phrase level, as I gave you my song of the day, probably the thing I say more than anything is, especially when my assistant will reach out to me with potential appointments, like this person wants to meet with you for whatever reason, and I don't see where there's any benefit. And my expression is always, I'll meet with anyone once. Mm-hmm. Right? I'll give you 15 minutes, 30 minutes of my time. And some of those conversations, Julienne, were a complete waste of my time. Some of those conversations I did business with. Some of those conversations we did absolutely no business together, but they referred me or introduced me to people that either came to work for me or I did business with. So
Mm-hmm.
we all waste 15 minutes or more in a day on dumber. Why not try to meet a new person and see?
And again, it's like I fed you these lines. It's amazing because I do teach this and I do work it because networking is sometimes a really misused term. It's about sharing and giving and appreciating. And the deal of somebody referred you business, it's not going to happen overnight. If you're lucky enough that somebody does give you something, that's great. But it's about learning and confirming, saying either that was interesting, I learned something new about a human or a business or something, I'll use this someday. And let me assure you, things I learned 20 years ago in interviewing are showing up and being helpful in my sessions. But I think about being curious and appreciative about the human contact, because we established some rapport initially just on the Zoom screens, but we live not too far from each other. And we took the radical approach of show up and eat and like sit across from each other and have a conversation. And that's going to like meld things together over time. New books, new information, new businesses. And that's the beauty. I mean, that's what was the great thing about taking a moment.
Absolutely. And even if, you don't have the geographical ability to do that, kind of going back to the someone not going to refer to you business overnight, too many people, maybe this is something else you subconsciously fed me when we were eating, but too many people go into like even a 15-minute, like, what's in it for me?
Yes.
Kind of identifying
Yes.
like, what can I latch onto to sell you something, when really that's not it. You should be learning as much as you can about the other person, because I can't tell you how many times a week later, a month later, 6 months later, I'll meet someone else who needs something someone else did that I don't
Mm-hmm.
do. And as long as that person didn't give me a terrible impression or creepy vibe, I'm going to introduce two people.
Mm-hmm. You're using words too. I've been part of an entrepreneurial group in New York, Launch 1000, where the county launched they put money into people to build businesses during the COVID period. And it's a fantastic program. It's founded somebody, Pam Holtzel and Deborah Novick, runs it here. And then Pam Holtzel's the entrepreneur. And she had this fantastic expression in her sessions: give, 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 and then ask. So it's a reverse philosophy of some things we're taught, that we're supposed to always have our hand down and say, what's in it for me, or be scanning the room. And the more you're generous, I think more comes back to in abundance. So we talked about food. So what's your go-to meal when you're trying to get psyched up, or it's just special? It just means something when you're having a moment and you're going to say, I'm going to make this for myself. This always gets me revved up and going. What's your
It's
go-to meal?
either sushi or steak,
Huh.
but
Okay.
my steak on my barbecue grill.
Okay. All right. That's good. And when did you start learning how to make steak, or cook steak, I should say?
I've been barbecuing since I'm a kid. So
Okay.
now I've just advanced it. So I've got the smoker, I've got the charcoal grill, the gas grill. So depending what I'm cooking and how it's seasoned determines which grill it goes on.
Oh my God.
But yes, last year for my birthday was the first time I treated myself to a giant Fred Flintstone tomahawk steak. And my kids have been asking me when we're going to have it again ever since.
Wow. And there's nothing like a good steak. Like, I've been around and it doesn't need much, just herbs and things. If it's perfect, it is a beautiful thing. I always argue with my husband when we go out, because he's from Dublin. They cook the meat a little, at least he did growing up. I like mine mooing.
Yep.
It's coming to the table. And it still kind of has a pulse. But I have this love of little tiny pasta with butter and fresh grated cheese. Has a memory from somebody who used to make that for me way back when. And that's my go-to meal when I'm trying to get psyched up for things. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it just sends out good memories of sharing stories and cooking for others. So do you like entertaining others, food, or bringing people
Entertaining
over?
others.
Yes.
I do, preferably outdoors. So
Mm,
normally
okay.
I'm that guy, if anyone's having an outdoor gathering, that as soon as I show up, the grill utensils are just handed to me.
Ah, okay. So you have a branding experience, and even in that's your go-to item. So which leads me to another question I had, was mulling about. So when your clients and community see your name, what do you want them to think about? What do you want them to be top of mind for them when they think of you?
Telling their story,
Mm,
telling their story, not selling themselves short, um, not losing sight of the big picture, right? Because one of the things I struggle with is when someone asks what I do, I usually have to kind of tailor that to who I'm speaking to and why, right? If I'm having a call with someone who wants me to write a book, I'm going to lean into more, I write books for people. Here's my sample of work. If I'm speaking to somebody who is an investor for something else, I have to kind of pivot that. But I never would have been comfortable even embracing the fact that I do all of these different things if I didn't get it through helping other people tell their stories, right? I get as much from my clients, I think sometimes, if not more, than they do from me,
hmm
because they inspire me when I hear their stories, what they've overcome. And I realize that either some of the things I've done that I don't think are unique are, or some of the things that I thought were really like, I have it so bad, they had it far worse, and I should just learn from them and move forward.
So I always say storytelling is when we tell a story, we get to see ourselves in a fresh light. What would you do if you could talk to your 13-year-old self? What story would you tell them, or what would advice, or what would you ask them to think about way back when, the little mini you who was barbecuing at an early age?
Oh, this is my show, so I'm just going to say it. Don't listen to anyone,
Ah,
or make sure you know who you're listening to first, because most people are just stupid. They're out for themselves. And I do mean to overgeneralize that, because I can't tell you, people who have accomplished nothing in life are the first ones to try to give you advice on what you should be doing with your life. And when you're young and impressionable and you don't realize that, hey, that person, and I'm not going to knock a 70-year-old janitor, but that person's a 70-year-old janitor who's still working and unhappy every day. And they're telling me what I need to do for the rest of my life when I want to be a writer. Why am I not asking people who are successful in the writing field how they got to be writers?
mhm.
Doctors aren't being mentored by firemen. Police officers aren't being mentored by astronauts. Yes, we can learn from everybody. Well, there are things we can learn from everybody, but if you want to pursue something that you're passionate about, find people who are already doing it.
It's true. And then I'm going to push back on you a little bit and say there are people, to find the people who are in a good place and are about themselves and their family, because no matter what they're doing in their life, if they're in a healthy spot and they can afford to be generous. I've seen people who've gone through a lot of trauma, a lot of challenges, whether they immigrated here and they had to downgrade what they were doing from their health. But I think it's where they are. And if they have a generous spirit, if they have a, a kindness to them, and that they're in the business, not in a business sense, in the business of lifting other people up besides themselves. I think that's the way to go. So I'm agreeing and disagreeing with you at the same time, but just opening it up to say, be careful. And I do agree what you said. Be careful who you hand your dreams to, and make sure that you're listening, but figuring out, like you've done, how to re-engineer it and say, what was valuable about that? But what can I take away from and do more? Because once we all know, and I'm first generation, I want to do a lot of different things, but I always grew up with that. What are you going to do that and make money out of that? And then decades later, circle back to some of those things that we called childish or just creative pursuits actually became the thing that fed me and energized me both. So lots of learning. So your listeners are going to take away a lot from this podcast. And what do you want them to land on and think about as they part company with us for this episode?
So honestly, I just want to add one last thing to what you said, because I appreciate the pushback. And I think this is probably, this applies to anybody out there. If you are in a position of mentoring somebody, and you're
Mm-hmm.
picking something with the client I was on with right before you, who's writing a book on mentoring and all of the good stuff that goes into that, you are in a position of power, whether it's formal, informal. If someone is coming to you for advice, or you're taking it upon yourself to impart advice on somebody, you need to make sure you're doing it from a place of genuinely listening to that person, understanding what it is they want to do, why they want to do it, and then advising accordingly, or choosing to keep your mouth shut if you cannot. Because you can, mentorship can do just as much harm as good if you think you know better than the person because you don't understand what it is that they actually want to do. And you can
Correct.
really ruin someone's dreams for a significant period of time.
And you're hitting on something very important. It's the listening that's needed most in situations. I know I say teach storytelling or use storytelling, but it's the act of listening and being present for that person, and also learning context. And if you look around and see angry people, somebody didn't hear them, see them, or appreciate them, even if you don't agree with their point of view or experiencing. And that's why I'm on a mission to spend more time like showing up as your other in your company meetings or in different situations to help you talk and disrupt how you're listening and experience somebody else. And I'm going to be doing a keynote in Boston in 2 weeks about AI and ChatGPT. Not me, I'm not teaching that part, but I'm commenting on that. At the end of the day, it's going to be the listening and the humanness that's going to make the biggest impact in our businesses and our relationships. So thank you for bringing that up.
My pleasure. Thank you for pushing back. I always love spirited debates, and I
Yes.
just get along well with people who have to be right and can't see the other side. So that I think that's part of what has made us become such good friends. As we hit time here, folks, if you're interested in checking out Julienne's presentation in Boston, please reach out to her directly. AI, ChatGPT, or conversations we have had on this podcast on multiple occasions. So you all know my feelings on it being a double-edged sword and a great tool when used properly. So if you are in the Boston area, definitely check it out. Can't hurt. You'll get some insights from Julienne. And we always appreciate you checking into the Pen Podcast on this special reverse episode that, again, I think it's been years since we've done. So I really appreciate you challenging me to show up and not just get to ask the questions. It was my pleasure.
Yes. And yeah, I can do more of that. Anybody out there, I do workshops and speeches and talks, and I feel it's a privilege. And like I said earlier, the best stories are waiting in the room. It's up to me to encourage you to bring them out and stand back and listen to see what happens. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julienne. Everyone have a wonderful day. We'll catch you on the next episode.